The evening sky had already turned dark as winter settled in early, bringing with it a biting cold that cut through even the thickest layers of clothing. The bus stop on Pine Street stood nearly empty except for a handful of tired souls waiting for the last bus of the night. Among them was Thomas, a 38-year-old nurse with tired eyes that somehow still managed to hold warmth. Thomas pulled his worn navy coat tighter around his body, the fabric threadbare in places but still providing some protection against the harsh winter wind. His day had been especially long. A double shift at City General Hospital where emergencies had piled up one after another. His feet ached in his scuffed work shoes, and all he wanted was to get home to his two young daughters, Lily and Grace, who were waiting for him with their babysitter. Being a single dad wasn't what Thomas had planned for his life. 3 years ago, his wife Diane had gone to sleep with a headache and never woken up. A brain aneurysm, the doctors had said. Just like that, their little family of 4 had become 3, with Thomas suddenly responsible for raising 2 little girls while keeping a roof over their heads. The grief still visited him on quiet nights, but he had learned to live alongside it, focusing instead on giving his daughters the best life he could. Tonight, he'd promised to read them a bedtime story, even though he knew they might already be asleep by the time he got home. He checked his watch, 10:45 p.m., and sighed, watching his breath form little clouds in the cold air. The bus was running late again. That's when he noticed her. In the corner of the bus shelter sat an elderly woman he hadn't seen there before. Her clothes were mismatched and worn, a thin sweater, faded pants, and shoes that had clearly seen better days. She had no coat, just a tattered scarf wrapped around her neck and shoulders. Her hands, wrinkled and spotted with age, trembled as she tried to rub some warmth into her arms. Her gray hair peeked out from under a knit cap that was too small to cover her ears, which had turned bright red from the cold. Thomas watched as she hunched further into herself, trying to make her body smaller as if that might somehow keep her warmer. The temperature had dropped below freezing hours ago, and the forecast had mentioned possible snow. Without proper protection, this woman was risking hypothermia or worse. Without thinking twice, Thomas walked over to her. "Excuse me, ma'am? Are you okay?" The woman looked up, startled by his approach. Her face was weathered, with deep lines that spoke of a life fully lived, but her eyes held a clarity that surprised him. "Just waiting for the bus like everyone else," she replied, her voice steady despite her shivering body. Thomas nodded, then made a decision. He slipped off his coat, the one his daughters had saved up to buy him for his birthday last month. They'd been so proud when they presented it to him, their small hands having carefully wrapped it in newspaper because they couldn't afford proper gift wrap. It was his most prized possession. "Here," he said, draping the coat gently over the woman's shoulders. "You need this more than I do." The woman's eyes widened. "Oh no, I couldn't possibly." "Please," Thomas insisted with a gentle smile. "I've got others at home." It wasn't entirely true. He had an old windbreaker that barely kept out the chill, but he couldn't bear the thought of this woman freezing while he stood by and did nothing. "That's very kind, but what about you? Won't you be cold?" she asked, even as her fingers instinctively clutched the edges of the coat, drawing it closer around her thin frame. Thomas shrugged, trying to hide the goosebumps already rising on his arms. "I run hot. Besides, my stop isn't far." This was another small lie. His apartment was actually a 30-minute bus ride followed by a 10-minute walk. But something about this woman reminded him of his own grandmother, who had always been there for him growing up. How could he walk away knowing she was suffering? The woman studied his face for a moment, seeming to look beyond his friendly smile to the exhaustion underneath. Then, with a nod that felt like she was accepting more than just a coat, she slipped her arms through the sleeves. The coat engulfed her small frame, but the relief on her face was immediate. "Thank you," she said simply. "My name is Eleanor." "Thomas," he replied, sitting down beside her on the bench. "Nice to meet you, Eleanor." As they sat there waiting for the bus, Thomas found himself talking about his daughters, how 10-year-old Lily was obsessed with space and wanted to be an astronaut, while 7-year-old Grace loved animals and kept bringing home injured birds and stray cats for him to help fix. He told Eleanor about their small apartment where the heating only worked half the time, about how he was trying to save up for community college courses to become a registered nurse instead of just an aide, which would mean better hours and pay. "They sound like wonderful children," Eleanor said, a genuine smile warming her face. "You must be very proud." "They're everything to me," Thomas replied simply. "After my wife died, well, they're the reason I get up every morning." Eleanor nodded, understanding in her eyes. Life gives us burdens, but also reasons to carry them. The headlights of the approaching bus cut through their conversation, illuminating the bus stop in harsh fluorescent light. Thomas helped Eleanor to her feet, making sure she was steady before letting go. As they boarded the bus, he noticed several other passengers watching them. A businessman with an expensive briefcase, a college student with headphones, and a well-dressed woman who quickly looked away when he caught her eye. Thomas paid for both his and Eleanor's fare, waving away her protests. "Consider it my good deed for the day," he said with a smile. They found seats near the back of the bus, and as the vehicle pulled away from the curb, Thomas felt a strange sense of peace despite the cold seeping through his thin work scrubs. The night outside was dark and bitter, but inside something warm had bloomed, from a simple act of kindness. What Thomas couldn't have known was that this small moment at a forgotten bus stop on a cold winter night was about to change his life forever. Sometimes the universe has a way of noticing when good hearts act without expectation of reward, and sometimes those moments become turning points in stories much larger than ourselves. But for now, Thomas was just a tired dad on his way home, looking forward to kissing his sleeping daughters' foreheads and falling into bed. Tomorrow would bring another long day of work, another struggle to make ends meet. He had no idea that the true story was just beginning, or that the elderly woman beside him was not at all what she appeared to be. The bus rumbled through the darkened streets, carrying them toward destinies neither could have imagined. Outside, the first snowflakes of winter began to fall, covering the city in a blanket of white that promised new beginnings. The old city bus rumbled down the empty streets, its headlights cutting through the darkness as snowflakes danced in their beam. Inside, the warm yellow lights cast a soft glow over the scattered passengers. Most kept to themselves, eyes fixed on phones or staring blankly out windows at the passing night, each lost in their own world after a long day. But not everyone was ignoring their surroundings. In the middle section, a smartly dressed woman in her early 50s watched with interest as Thomas and Eleanor talked in the back of the bus. Catherine Chen, though no one on the bus knew her name, had been observing the interaction since the bus stop. When Thomas had given his coat to Eleanor, Catherine had discreetly taken out her phone and snapped a photo. It wasn't often you witnessed such genuine kindness these days. What struck her most wasn't just the giving of the coat, though that alone was noteworthy, but the way Thomas had done it. No grand gesture, no looking around to see if anyone was watching, no expectation of praise or reward. Just a simple human response to someone in need. As the chief operations officer of Meridian Healthcare, one of the city's largest medical networks, Catherine had learned to recognize authenticity. And what she'd just witnessed was as real as it gets. Now, as the bus rattled along its route, she listened as the conversation between Thomas and Eleanor continued to unfold. "So what brought you to the bus stop tonight?" Thomas asked Eleanor, trying not to shiver as the air conditioning in the bus hit his thin scrubs. He'd worked up the courage to ask after they'd been chatting for a while. Something about Eleanor didn't quite fit the image of a homeless person, despite her appearance. Eleanor adjusted the borrowed coat around her shoulders, looking thoughtful. "I suppose you could say I'm doing research," she said carefully. "Learning about how things really work in this city." "Research? Are you a writer or something?" Thomas asked, intrigued. Eleanor smiled mysteriously. "Or something," she agreed. "But enough about me. Tell me more about your daughters. You mentioned saving for their education?" Thomas nodded, his expression softening the way it always did when he spoke about his girls. "Every spare penny. It's not much yet, but I'm determined they'll have choices I never had. Lily's already talking about college even though she's only 10. She's got this whole plan to study astronomy," his voice filled with pride. "And Grace, well, she's going to be a veterinarian or wildlife rescuer. No question about it." Eleanor listened attentively as Thomas pulled out his wallet to show her a slightly bent photo of two smiling girls with their father's warm eyes and their mother's dimples. In the picture, they stood in front of a modest Christmas tree, arms around each other. Her matching homemade sweaters slightly too big for their small frames. "They made these sweaters themselves," Thomas explained, touching the photo gently. Learned from YouTube videos. Can you believe that? Stayed up late for weeks to surprise me. They're beautiful girls, Eleanor said sincerely. You've done well with them. Thomas tucked the photo away carefully. I try. Some days are harder than others. When my wife Anna died, I didn't know how we'd make it. But kids, they're resilient, you know? They taught me how to keep going. As they talked, neither noticed Catherine watching them, nor did they see her make a few quick notes on her phone. What do you do at the hospital? Eleanor asked, pulling the coat tighter as the bus doors opened at a stop, letting in a blast of cold air. I'm a nurse's aide right now, Thomas explained. I handle basic patient care, taking vital signs, helping patients bathe and eat, that sort of thing. It's not glamorous, but it matters. His face lit up as he continued. There was this elderly patient last week who hadn't spoken to anyone for days. The doctors thought she might have had a stroke affecting her speech. But I noticed she had a photo of a garden by her bed, so I just started talking to her about my mom's old garden while I was changing her sheets. Next thing you know, she's telling me all about the rose bushes she's grown for 40 years. Turned out she was just depressed and didn't see the point in talking anymore after her husband died. Eleanor nodded appreciatively. That kind of attention makes all the difference in healthcare. Seeing the person, not just the patient. Exactly, Thomas agreed, surprised by her understanding. That's what I always tell the new aides. But honestly, the system makes it hard. We're always short-staffed, overworked. Some days I barely have time to check if patients have eaten, let alone have a real conversation with them. Eleanor's expression grew more serious. Do you think that's a failure of management or just the reality of healthcare today? Thomas hesitated, surprised by the pointed question. Both, I guess. Our floor manager tries her best, but the decisions come from way above her pay grade. People in those big offices, they don't see what happens on the ground. They see numbers, not faces. At this, Catherine shifted in her seat, leaning slightly closer to hear better. Eleanor merely nodded, encouraging Thomas to continue. If I could change anything, Thomas said, warming to the subject, I'd make sure every administrator had to spend time with patients regularly, just to remember why we do this work in the first place. The bus jolted to a stop and a few more passengers got on, stamping snow from their boots. Thomas glanced out the window, trying to gauge how far they were from his stop. The conversation lulled momentarily as both he and Eleanor watched the snowfall growing heavier outside. Will your daughters be awake when you get home? Eleanor asked after a moment. Thomas checked his watch and sighed. Probably not. My neighbor watches them when I work late. She's good about getting them to bed on time. I'll just peek in on them, kiss them goodnight even though they're already asleep. That must be hard, Eleanor said softly. Missing those moments. Thomas nodded, a flash of sadness crossing his face. It is. But that's why I'm trying to become a registered nurse. Better pay, more regular hours. I've been taking online classes when I can, but between work and the girls. He trailed off, then smiled ruefully. Sorry, I don't mean to dump my problems on you. Not at all, Eleanor assured him. Sometimes it helps to talk to a stranger. No judgment, just listening. As their conversation continued, Catherine noticed something remarkable. Despite clearly being exhausted, despite the late hour and the cold seeping through his thin scrubs, Thomas spoke with genuine passion when discussing patient care. His eyes lit up when he described small victories. A patient who took their first steps after surgery. Another who finally agreed to treatment after days of refusal because Thomas had taken the time to explain things in a way they could understand. This wasn't someone who viewed healthcare as just a job. This was someone with a calling. The bus turned onto Maple Drive, and Thomas reached up to pull the cord for his stop. This is me, he said, standing up. He hesitated, looking at Eleanor in his coat. Will you be okay? Do you have somewhere to go tonight? Eleanor smiled reassuringly. Don't worry about me. I'll be just fine. Thomas still looked concerned. The shelter on 7th Street is decent if you need a place. Tell them Thomas sent you. My friend Robert works there. That's very thoughtful, Eleanor said. I have arrangements, but thank you. Thomas nodded, still not entirely convinced. Well, keep the coat. It looks better on you anyway. He flashed a warm smile and added, It was nice talking with you, Eleanor. Take care of yourself. As Thomas moved toward the exit, Catherine made a quick decision. She gathered her things and stood up too, exiting at the same stop. Thomas noticed her but thought nothing of it, assuming she lived nearby. He waved goodbye to Eleanor through the window as the bus pulled away, then turned up his collar against the snow and started walking toward his apartment building. Catherine waited until Thomas was a reasonable distance ahead before following. She wasn't stalking him. She just wanted to confirm his address from the hospital records. As he disappeared into a modest apartment building with peeling paint and a security door that didn't quite close properly, Catherine made a final note in her phone and then called her driver to pick her up. Back on the bus, Eleanor sat quietly, still wrapped in Thomas's coat. She slipped her hand into the pocket and found a child's drawing on crumpled paper, clearly a family portrait drawn in crayon, with "Love you, Daddy," written in a child's uneven handwriting. Eleanor carefully refolded it and put it back in the pocket, a small smile playing on her lips. The bus continued its journey through the snowy night, carrying Eleanor and the other remaining passengers toward their various destinations. But for three people, Thomas, Eleanor, and the mysterious Catherine, this ordinary bus ride had set extraordinary events in motion. None of them could have guessed how their lives would intersect again in just a few short days, or how a simple act of kindness on a cold winter night would ripple outward, changing everything in its path. 3 days passed since that snowy night at the bus stop. The incident had started to fade in Thomas's mind, replaced by the immediate concerns of daily life, getting the girls to school on time, picking up extra shifts to cover Lily's upcoming school trip, and trying to squeeze in study time for his nursing certification. The morning had begun like any other. Thomas had made breakfast for the girls, simple oatmeal with brown sugar and bananas cut into smiling faces. He'd helped Grace find her missing library book and reminded Lily to pack her science project. The usual beautiful chaos of their morning routine had left him running late for his shift, but he'd still taken the time to walk them to the bus stop and wait until they were safely aboard. Now, as he scrubbed down equipment in the hospital supply room during his break, his mind was already on dinner plans. The chicken in their fridge needed to be cooked tonight, and he was mentally sorting through what vegetables he could pair it with when his phone rang. Frowning at the unknown number, he answered. "Hello? Is this Thomas Wilson?" asked a professional-sounding woman. "Yes, this is he." Thomas wedged the phone between his ear and shoulder as he continued organizing supplies. "My name is Patricia Reynolds. I'm calling from Meridian Healthcare's administrative offices. We'd like to invite you for an interview tomorrow at 2 p.m. for a nursing supervisor position." Thomas nearly dropped the phone. "I'm sorry, what? There must be some mistake. I never applied for a position at Meridian." There was a pause on the other end. "According to our records, you were recommended by a senior executive. The position includes benefits and a significant salary increase from your current role. Would you be available tomorrow afternoon?" Thomas's mind raced. Meridian Healthcare was the largest medical network in the city, known for its cutting-edge technology and excellent working conditions. A position there would transform his family's financial situation overnight. But it made no sense. Who would have recommended him? Yes, I could be available," he said cautiously. "But I should mention that I'm still working on my RN certification. I'm currently a nurse's aide at City General. We're aware of your qualifications, Mr. Wilson. The executive was quite specific about wanting to meet with you personally. Shall we say 2 p.m. tomorrow at our main administrative building, 24th floor executive suite?" After getting the address and ending the call, Thomas stood motionless in the supply closet, trying to process what had just happened. It must be a mistake, or worse, some kind of scam. But the woman had known his name, his current position. Everything checked out. Regardless, he couldn't afford to miss this opportunity, however unlikely. After his shift ended, he called his neighbor Judy to arrange childcare and then spent hours ironing his only dress shirt and polishing his worn dress shoes. He practiced interview questions late into the night, reading from outdated career books he'd borrowed from the library. The next day, Thomas stood outside the gleaming glass tower of Meridian Healthcare's headquarters, feeling wildly out of place. The reflection in the window showed a man trying his best, hair neatly combed, shirt pressed, tie straight, but his suit was visibly outdated. Purchased secondhand years ago for Anna's funeral and rarely worn since. Taking a deep breath, he entered the building, gave his name to the security guard, and was directed to the executive elevators. The ride to the 24th floor seemed both too fast and agonizingly slow. When the doors opened, he found himself in a reception area more luxurious than any place he'd ever been. All polished marble, soft lighting, and modern art. The receptionist smiled warmly. "Mr. Wilson, they're expecting you. Go right through those double doors." Thomas straightened his tie one last time and walked through the doors into a large, airy office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. A group of people in expensive suits turned toward him as he entered, but his eyes were immediately drawn to a familiar figure standing by the window. It took him several seconds to recognize her without the tattered clothes, but there was no mistaking those eyes, keen and observant, with a depth of intelligence he'd noticed even at the bus stop. "Eleanor?" he whispered in disbelief. The elderly woman smiled, now dressed in an elegant navy suit, her previously disheveled gray hair styled in a neat bob. She stepped forward, extending her hand. "Eleanor Fisher, or as most people here call me, Dr. Fisher, Chief Executive Officer of Meridian Healthcare. It's lovely to see you again, Thomas." The shock must have been written plainly across his face because she gestured toward a chair. "Please sit down before you fall down. I believe I owe you an explanation." Thomas sank into the chair, his mind struggling to connect the homeless woman from the bus stop with the polished executive standing before him. The other suits in the room, whom he now realized must be high-level administrators, were watching with interest. I don't understand," he finally managed. Eleanor sat across from him, her expression gentle but direct. "For the past month, I've been conducting what you might call field research. After being appointed CEO, I wanted to understand the true state of healthcare in this city, not just from reports and statistics, but from real experience. So I've been visiting different hospitals and clinics, sometimes as a patient, sometimes simply observing." She folded her hands on her lap, the picture of composed professionalism. Yet Thomas could still see traces of the woman he'd met at the bus stop. That night I had spent the day at City General, observing how patients were treated, how staff interacted with each other. I wanted to see your hospital as ordinary people see it, not as a VIP getting special treatment. A woman stepped forward, and with a jolt, Thomas recognized her as another passenger from the bus that night. "This is Catherine Chen, our Chief Operations Officer," Eleanor introduced. She was also observing that day and happened to be on the same bus. Catherine nodded to him. "I witnessed your interaction with Dr. Fisher at the bus stop. I hope you don't mind, but I took a photo and sent it to our team that night." She turned a tablet toward him, showing a picture of Thomas draping his coat over Eleanor's shoulders, his expression kind despite his obvious exhaustion. "What I didn't tell you," Eleanor continued, "is that before becoming a hospital administrator, I was an emergency room nurse for 20 years. I've seen countless healthcare workers come and go, and I've developed a pretty good sense for the ones who truly care versus those who are just collecting a paycheck." She leaned forward slightly. "After our conversation on the bus, I asked Catherine to look into your work history. Your performance reviews at City General are exemplary. Your supervisors describe you as dedicated, compassionate, and innovative even with limited resources. Patients have written letters praising your care, and all this while working double shifts to support your daughters and studying for your nursing certification." Thomas shifted uncomfortably in his chair, unaccustomed to such praise. "I just do my job," he said quietly. "That's precisely it," Eleanor replied. "You're just doing your job is exceptional, Thomas. The way you notice the human being behind the patient, the way you advocate for better care despite limitations, the fact that you gave your coat, a birthday gift from your daughters no less, to a complete stranger without hesitation." She stood and walked to her desk, picking up a folder. "Which brings us to why you're here. We're not offering you a nursing supervisor position." Thomas's heart sank momentarily. "We're offering you something more suited to your talents," Eleanor continued, returning to hand him the folder. "We're creating a new position, Director of Patient Care Experience. The role would involve implementing training programs for staff at all levels on providing compassionate, patient-centered care. You would report directly to Catherine and have significant input on care protocols throughout our network." Thomas opened the folder with trembling hands, scanning the documents inside. The salary figure made his eyes widen. It was nearly triple what he currently earned. The benefits package included comprehensive health care, a retirement plan, and even a college scholarship program for dependents. This can't be real," he whispered. "It's very real," Catherine assured him. "We've been wanting to create this position for some time. But we needed someone with both practical experience and genuine empathy. Someone who understands what matters most to patients because they prioritize it naturally. The position comes with flexible hours," Eleanor added. We understand your daughters are your priority, and we've structured the role to accommodate that. You'll primarily work weekdays with minimal evening commitments. Thomas looked up from the paperwork, still stunned. But I don't have the qualifications for something like this. I haven't even finished my RN certification. Eleanor smiled. Meridian will sponsor the completion of your nursing degree and any additional education you wish to pursue. But the qualities we most need for this role, compassion, integrity, innovation, the ability to see beyond systems to the people they serve, those aren't taught in any classroom. You demonstrated those qualities when you thought no one who mattered was watching. She gestured toward the window, where the city spread out below them. Every day, thousands of patients come through our doors. Many are experiencing the worst days of their lives. They deserve care from people who see them as human beings, not just cases to be processed. You understand that instinctively, Thomas. We want you to help instill that understanding throughout our organization. Thomas stared at the documents in his hand, then looked up at the faces watching him expectantly. His mind was spinning with possibilities. A stable schedule that would let him be home for dinner with his girls most nights. Enough money to move to a better apartment with reliable heating. The ability to save for his daughter's education without working himself to exhaustion. But beyond the personal benefits, he recognized something else in the offer. The chance to make the kind of difference he'd always wanted to make in healthcare. To take what he knew about patient care and amplify it across an entire hospital system. Can I ask one question? He said finally. Eleanor nodded. Of course, why go to such lengths? The disguise riding buses in the middle of winter? Couldn't you have learned about hospital conditions through normal channels? Eleanor's expression grew thoughtful. Reports and statistics tell you what's happening, but not how it feels. I needed to experience our healthcare system as our patients do. The frustrations, the fears, the moments of relief when someone shows them kindness. She smiled slightly. And if I had walked into City General in a designer suit with an entourage, do you think I would have seen the real hospital? Or a carefully prepared version? Thomas nodded slowly, understanding. Besides, Eleanor added, if I hadn't been at that bus stop on that particular night, we wouldn't be having this conversation now. Sometimes the best way to find exceptional people is to look in unexpected places. She extended her hand again. So, Thomas Wilson, will you join us at Meridian Healthcare? Thomas looked down at the hand offered to him, the same hand that had gratefully accepted his coat just 3 days ago, and realized that sometimes life changes direction when you least expect it. Sometimes a simple act of kindness opens doors you never knew existed. He took her hand and shook it firmly. Yes, he said, his voice growing stronger as the reality began to sink in. Yes, I will. Eleanor's face broke into a genuine smile. The same warm expression he'd seen on the bus, now framed by the trappings of corporate success but no less authentic. Excellent. Catherine will show you around the facilities and introduce you to your new team. We'd like you to start in 2 weeks, if that works for your notice period at City General. As Thomas rose to follow Catherine out of the office, Eleanor called after him. Oh, and Thomas, I have something for you. She reached behind her desk and pulled out a familiar navy coat, his coat, now professionally cleaned and pressed. I believe this belongs to you. Thomas shook his head, smiling. Keep it. It looks better on you anyway. Eleanor laughed, a bright, clear sound that transformed her from imposing CEO back to the woman he'd met at the bus stop. How about we both keep our ends of the bargain? You gave me your coat when I needed it. Now let me give you the opportunity you deserve. As Thomas left the executive floor with Catherine, his mind was already racing with ideas for improving patient care, with plans for telling his daughters about their new life, with the realization that everything had changed, because he'd done what anyone should do, shown kindness to a stranger in need. What he didn't know yet was that this was just the beginning of how that simple act would transform not just his life, but the lives of countless others in ways he couldn't possibly imagine. After the shock of the job offer, Thomas found himself being led through the gleaming corridors of Meridian Healthcare's headquarters by Catherine Chen. His mind was still trying to process everything that had happened in the last hour, discovering that Eleanor was actually Dr. Fisher, the CEO of the entire healthcare network, and being offered a position he'd never dreamed possible. I still can't believe this is happening, Thomas said as they walked past a wall of awards showcasing Meridian's achievements in patient care. It feels like I'm going to wake up any minute. Catherine smiled, her professional demeanor softening slightly. I had a feeling you'd react this way. Not everyone would have given their coat to a stranger on a freezing night, Thomas, especially not someone working double shifts to support their family. She paused by a large window overlooking the hospital complex below. That kind of instinctive compassion is precisely what we're trying to foster at Meridian. They continued the tour, with Catherine explaining how the position had been under consideration for months. Healthcare has become too focused on metrics and efficiency at the expense of human connection, she explained. We can have the most advanced medical technology in the world, but if patients don't feel seen and heard, we're failing at a fundamental level. She led him into a conference room where architectural plans were spread across a table. This will be your primary workspace. We're redesigning this entire floor to create a patient experience center, a place where staff can train, develop new approaches to care, and where patients and families can provide direct feedback on their experiences. Thomas looked around the spacious room, trying to imagine himself working here. It was worlds away from the cramped supply closets and busy nurses' stations he was used to. The position comes with a team of 4 staff members initially, with room to grow the department as needed, Catherine continued. You'll have input on hiring decisions, of course. I don't know the first thing about managing a team, Thomas admitted, feeling suddenly out of his depth. Catherine nodded understandingly. That's why we've built in a robust orientation period and paired you with an executive coach for the first 6 months. Dr. Fisher and I don't expect you to know everything right away, Thomas. We're investing in your potential. As they continued the tour, Catherine outlined the specifics of the role. Thomas would be responsible for developing training programs on compassionate care, analyzing patient feedback to identify areas for improvement, and working directly with department heads to implement changes. He would report directly to Catherine but have regular meetings with Dr. Fisher as well. The most important aspect of your role, Catherine emphasized as they entered what would be his office, a modest but well-appointed space with a desk, meeting table, and photos of smiling patients on the walls, is that you'll be the voice of the patient in all our executive decisions. When we're discussing budget allocations or new protocols, you'll be there to remind us of the human impact of those choices. Thomas ran his hand along the smooth surface of the desk, trying to picture himself sitting behind it. It's a huge responsibility. It is, Catherine agreed. But Dr. Fisher and I believe you're uniquely qualified for it. Not because of your credentials, but because of who you are. She handed him another folder, this one containing more details about the compensation package. As we mentioned, the position includes comprehensive benefits, medical, dental, vision, life insurance, and a 401k with company matching. There's also a relocation allowance to help you find better housing if you wish. Thomas opened the folder, his eyes widening again at the figures. The salary alone would transform his family's financial situation overnight. No more worrying about whether he could afford both the electric bill and Lily's science camp. No more patching clothes and shoes until they fell apart. No more choosing between paying for his nursing courses and buying birthday presents for his daughters. The flexible hours are non-negotiable, by the way, Catherine added with a small smile. Dr. Fisher was quite clear that your role as a father comes first. We've structured the position so most of your work can be done during school hours, with the option to work from home when necessary. There will be some evening commitments for board meetings or special events, but we'll provide ample notice so you can arrange childcare. Thomas felt a lump forming in his throat. After 3 years of constantly juggling work and parenting, of missing school plays and parent-teacher conferences because he couldn't afford to take time off, this felt almost too good to be true. Why me? He asked quietly. There must be hundreds of more qualified candidates out there. People with management experience, advanced degrees. Catherine considered his question carefully before answering. The night on the bus when you gave your coat to Dr. Fisher, did you do it because you thought you'd get something in return? Of course not, Thomas replied immediately. That's precisely why, Catherine said simply. In that moment, you weren't thinking about advantage or opportunity. You saw someone in need and responded with genuine kindness. That quality is rare, Thomas, especially in people who have faced the kind of hardships you have. Many become hardened or cynical, focused only on their own survival. She gathered the architectural plans and tucked them into a portfolio. Dr. Fisher has been in healthcare administration for over 30 years. In that time, she's developed an almost uncanny ability to recognize authentic compassion. When she says you're the right person for this role, I've learned to trust her judgment. As they headed back toward the elevators, Thomas had one more question. The coat, was it all a test? Did Dr. Fisher pretend to be homeless just to see how people would react? Catherine shook her head. Not at all. As she explained, she's been visiting hospitals incognito to understand the patient experience firsthand. The bus stop encounter was completely unplanned. She'd spent all day at City General and was waiting for her driver when the weather turned much colder than expected. She had left her coat in the car, not anticipating being outside for long. She pressed the elevator button and turned to face Thomas. Your act of kindness wasn't part of any test or plan. It was simply a moment of humanity that happened to be witnessed by someone in a position to recognize its value. The elevator doors opened, and they stepped inside. As they descended, Thomas felt as if his whole life was reorienting itself around this unexpected pivot point. Just 3 days ago, he had been a struggling nurse's aide, working double shifts to make ends meet, stealing moments with his daughters between work and sleep. Now he was being offered a chance to reshape patient care across an entire healthcare system, to secure his family's future, to use his natural compassion as a force for change. There's one more thing, Catherine said as they reached the lobby. Dr. Fisher would like you to join her for dinner tonight to discuss the position further and answer any questions you might have. She suggested you bring your daughters as well. She'd like to meet them. Thomas hesitated. My girls? But they're not exactly used to fancy dinners with hospital CEOs, Catherine smiled. Dr. Fisher specifically mentioned wanting to meet the young ladies who raised such a kind father. And don't worry about the setting. She suggested Pizza Palace on 5th Street. Apparently they have excellent arcade games as well as pizza. At this, Thomas couldn't help but laugh. The idea of the elegant, powerful Dr. Fisher he'd just met sitting in a noisy pizza restaurant surrounded by arcade games seemed incongruous. And yet, he remembered how comfortable Eleanor had been on that city bus, how genuinely she had listened to his stories about his daughters. Pizza Palace is Lily and Grace's favorite place, he admitted. We only go on special occasions, though. I'd say this qualifies, Catherine replied, her eyes twinkling. Dr. Fisher will meet you there at 6:30. No need to dress up. It's meant to be a casual conversation, not another interview. As they shook hands goodbye at the entrance to the building, Catherine added one final thought. Thomas, I know this is all overwhelming, but sometimes life offers us unexpected doorways to better futures. The hardest part can simply be believing we deserve to walk through them. Thomas nodded, those words striking a chord within him. Since Anna's death, he had focused solely on survival, on keeping his daughters fed, clothed, sheltered, and loved. The idea of thriving, of building a career that aligned with his values while providing financial security, had seemed like an unattainable dream. As he walked away from Meridian's headquarters, his mind was racing with possibilities, moving to an apartment where both girls could have their own rooms. Being able to afford dance lessons for Grace, who twirled around their living room pretending to be a ballerina. Having time to help Lily build the telescope she'd been designing on scraps of paper for months. Completing his nursing degree without working himself to exhaustion. But beyond the personal benefits, what excited him most was the opportunity to make a real difference in healthcare, to take what he'd learned about compassionate patient care from years in the trenches and elevate it to a system-wide level. To be a voice for patients when decisions were being made, to help train staff to see the person behind the diagnosis, just as he always tried to do. By the time he reached the bus stop, the same route he'd taken that snowy night, though at a different location, Thomas had made his decision. This unexpected door had opened before him, and he owed it to himself and his daughters to step through. His phone buzzed with a text from Judy, his neighbor, checking how the interview had gone. With fingers still trembling slightly from excitement, he typed back, "Better than I could have imagined. Taking the girls out for pizza tonight to celebrate. We'll explain everything later." As he boarded the bus to head home, Thomas couldn't help but marvel at how quickly life could change. 3 days ago, he'd been a struggling single dad, giving away his only good coat to a stranger at a bus stop. Today, he was preparing to accept a position that would transform his family's future. All because that stranger had seen something in him that he hadn't fully recognized in himself. The bus pulled away from the curb, carrying Thomas toward his apartment where his daughters would soon be returning from school. Unaware that their lives were about to change dramatically, he smiled, imagining their faces when he told them about Pizza Palace tonight. And even more, when he explained that soon they wouldn't have to count every penny or wear second-hand clothes or worry about the heat shutting off in winter. Outside the window, the city seemed different somehow, brighter, more full of possibility than it had been this morning. Thomas realized that was because he was seeing it through new eyes. Eyes that could now look beyond immediate survival to a future filled with hope. As the familiar streets passed by, Thomas thought again of that cold night at the bus stop and the simple act of giving his coat to a shivering stranger. He had never expected anything in return. He'd simply responded to someone in need with the same compassion he showed his patients every day. And somehow that ordinary moment of kindness had set extraordinary events in motion. He touched his phone in his pocket, already eager to call his daughter's school and let them know he'd be picking them up personally today. He had news to share after all. News about pizza and arcade games tonight, and about a whole new chapter, beginning for the Wilson family. 6 months had passed since that life-changing day when Thomas Wilson discovered the true identity of the woman at the bus stop. The seasons had turned from the bitter cold of winter to the warm embrace of summer, and with that change had come transformations far beyond what Thomas could have imagined. The morning sun streamed through the windows of his new office at Meridian Healthcare, casting a golden glow across the photographs and thank you cards that now lined his walls. Each one told a story. Elderly patients smiling with their families, children clutching hand-drawn pictures of the nurses who had cared for them, staff members gathered around a newly redesigned patient room. All of them represented some small victory in the quiet revolution Thomas had been leading. He stood at the window, coffee mug in hand, looking out over the hospital campus. In the 6 months since he'd accepted the position as Director of Patient Care Experience, he'd thrown himself into the role with the same quiet dedication that had defined his career as a nurse's aide. But now his compassionate approach to healthcare was reaching far beyond the individual patients he once cared for. It was transforming an entire healthcare system. "Good morning, Director Wilson," came a cheerful voice from the doorway. Thomas turned to see Olivia, his administrative assistant, carrying a stack of folders. He smiled, still not entirely comfortable with the title. "Just Thomas is fine, Olivia. You know that." She grinned and set the folders on his desk. "The team is ready in the conference room whenever you are. Dr. Fisher just arrived as well." Thomas nodded, gathering his notes for the morning meeting. Today marked 6 months since the launch of his first major initiative, the CME program, which had redesigned how staff interacted with patients from the moment they entered the hospital. The results had exceeded even Dr. Fisher's expectations. As he walked toward the conference room, Thomas passed walls now adorned with the CME campaign posters. Simple, powerful photographs of patients holding signs that completed the phrase, "I am more than my diagnosis." The answers ranged from heartwarming, "I'm a grandmother of 7," to funny and terrible, "at karaoke, but I try anyway," to deeply moving, "fighting for one more birthday with my son." Campaign had been Thomas's first big idea, a way to remind every staff member, from surgeons to custodial workers, that patients were people first. Each hospital room now had a whiteboard where patients or their families could write things they wanted their care team to know about them, beyond their medical charts. Entering the conference room, Thomas was greeted by his team and several department heads. At the head of the table sat Dr. Eleanor Fisher, looking every bit the polished CEO in a tailored suit, though Thomas could still sometimes glimpse the woman from the bus stop in her warm, observant eyes. "There he is," Dr. Fisher said with a smile. "The man who's managed to improve our patient satisfaction scores by 27% in just 6 months. Thomas felt his cheeks warm at the praise. "It's been a team effort," he replied, taking his seat. "And it helps to have leadership that actually cares about the human side of healthcare." The meeting proceeded with presentations on the program's impact, not just on patient satisfaction, which had indeed risen dramatically, but on measurable health outcomes as well. Patients in the CME program had shorter hospital stays, required less pain medication, and showed better compliance with treatment plans after discharge. The data confirmed what Thomas had always believed. treating patients as whole people, not just collections of symptoms, led to better healing. When the presentations concluded, Dr. Fisher addressed the room. What Thomas and his team have accomplished in 6 months is nothing short of remarkable. They've proven that compassionate care isn't just a nice idea, it's good medicine and good business. The board has unanimously approved expanding the program to all 15 Meridian facilities across the state. A round of applause filled the room. Thomas felt a surge of pride, not for himself, but for what this meant for thousands of patients who would now receive care that recognized their humanity alongside their illness. As the meeting wrapped up and people began to file out, Dr. Fisher motioned for Thomas to stay behind. "Walk with me," she said once they were alone. "There's something I want to show you." They left the administrative building and crossed the campus toward the main hospital. As they walked, Dr. Fisher asked about Thomas's daughters. "They're thriving," he answered, unable to keep the pride from his voice. "Lily won the science fair last month with her project on light pollution and star visibility. And Grace finally got to join that dance class she's been dreaming about. She practices her routines for hours in our new living room. Says the hardwood floors are perfect for twirls." Dr. Fisher smiled. "And how are you finding the balance between work and family life?" Be honest, Thomas considered the question. The past 6 months had been busy, certainly, but nothing like the exhausting grind of his previous life. "For the first time since my wife died, I don't feel like I'm constantly choosing between being a good father and being good at my job," he admitted. "I'm home for dinner most nights. I can attend school events. I even have time to help with homework." He shook his head slightly in wonder. "And somehow I'm still accomplishing more professionally than I ever thought possible." "That's by design," Dr. Fisher replied. "We've found that people with balanced lives bring more creativity and energy to their work. The healthcare industry has a terrible habit of grinding down its most compassionate workers until they either burn out or become hardened. Breaking that cycle is part of our mission here." They entered the hospital through the main entrance, where a large banner announced the hospital's newly achieved 5-star patient satisfaction rating. Dr. Fisher led Thomas down corridors he now knew well, nodding to staff members who greeted them along the way. Finally, they reached the pediatric wing, which had been the first to implement Thomas's ideas. Dr. Fisher stopped outside a room where a nurse was engaged in animated conversation with a young patient, using a puppet to explain an upcoming procedure. "That's one of the graduates from your first training program, isn't it?" Dr. Fisher asked. Thomas nodded. "That's Ryan. He was already a good nurse, but he told me he was starting to feel disconnected from his patients, too focused on tasks and not enough on the people. The puppet thing was his own idea after our workshop on communicating with pediatric patients." They continued walking, passing more examples of the changes that had taken root throughout the hospital. Family comfort areas, staff members sitting at eye level with patients instead of standing over them, discharge instructions personalized with individual patient needs and home situations in mind. "You've started something remarkable here, Thomas," Dr. Fisher said as they reached a set of double doors. "But there's one more thing I wanted to show you today." She pushed open the doors to reveal a previously unused courtyard that had been transformed into a healing garden. Paths wound between flowering plants, small fountains created a peaceful background sound, and benches offered quiet places for reflection. In the center stood a simple plaque on a stone pedestal. Thomas moved closer to read the inscription, "The Wilson Center for Compassionate Care. Because everyone deserves to be seen." He stared at the plaque, momentarily speechless. Dr. Fisher stood beside him, watching his reaction. "The board voted unanimously," she explained. "This garden is just the beginning. We're establishing a permanent institute under your direction for research and training in compassionate healthcare practices. We want to change not just Meridian, but the entire approach to patient care in this country." Thomas traced his fingers over the engraved letters of his family name. "I don't know what to say." "You don't need to say anything," Dr. Fisher replied. "Just keep doing the work you were born to do." As they stood in the peaceful garden, a gentle breeze stirring the leaves, Dr. Fisher reached into her bag and pulled out a small package wrapped in simple blue paper. "This is for you," she said, handing it to him. "Consider it a 6-month anniversary gift." Curious, Thomas unwrapped the package to find a coat. Not his old one, but a new one of similar style, clearly of much higher quality. He unfolded it to find something embroidered on the inner lining. In elegant script were the words, "Kindness returns." "I know you weren't expecting anything when you gave me your coat that night," Dr. Fisher said softly. "That's precisely why you deserve to receive something in return. Not as payment, but as proof that kindness freely given has a way of finding its way back to us." Thomas ran his fingers over the embroidery, emotion welling in his throat. "Thank you," he managed. "There's one more thing," Dr. Fisher added. "A local news program got wind of our story. How our director of patient experience was hired after giving his coat to a homeless woman who turned out to be the CEO. They want to do a feature on you and the changes you've implemented." "Here," Thomas immediately shook his head. "I'm not comfortable being in the spotlight like that." "I thought you might say that," Dr. Fisher nodded understandingly. "But consider this. Your story might inspire others to similar acts of kindness, and it would give us a platform to talk about the importance of compassionate care in healthcare. The choice is yours, of course." Thomas thought about it, remembering how often he'd wished for a larger voice in healthcare during his years as an aide. This wasn't about personal recognition. It was about advocating for the kind of patient-centered care he'd always believed in. "All right," he agreed finally, "but only if we focus on the programs and their impact, not just on me." Dr. Fisher smiled. "I wouldn't have it any other way." 2 weeks later, the story aired on the evening news. Thomas watched it with his daughters in their new living room, feeling slightly surreal as he saw himself on screen talking about the importance of seeing patients as people first. The story juxtaposed his current role with his past as a nurse's aide, emphasizing how his frontline experience informed his approach to healthcare leadership. To Thomas's surprise, the segment ended with an announcement. Meridian Healthcare was launching a citywide winter coat drive inspired by his story, with collection points at all their facilities. The goal was to provide thousands of coats to those in need before the cold weather returned. The day after the broadcast, Thomas arrived at work to find his inbox flooded with emails, from healthcare workers inspired by the story, from patients sharing their own experiences, and from hospitals across the country asking about implementing similar programs. "Looks like you've started a movement, Catherine," Chen commented when she stopped by his office and saw him attempting to sort through the messages. Thomas shook his head in amazement. "All from a coat at a bus stop. All from recognizing the humanity in someone else," Catherine corrected gently. "That's the real story here." Over the following weeks, the coat drive gained momentum, far exceeding its initial goals. Local businesses set up collection points, schools organized coat-gathering competitions, and donations poured in from across the city. Thomas's daughters threw themselves into the effort, setting up a collection station at their school and making posters to hang around their neighborhood. On a crisp Saturday in early fall, Thomas stood with Lily and Grace at the community center where the coats would be distributed. Volunteers bustled around them, organizing thousands of donated coats by size and type. Dr. Fisher arrived with a team of Meridian staff members, all wearing T-shirts with the slogan "Kindness Returns" printed across the front. As the doors opened and people began to enter, Thomas watched as each person was treated with dignity and respect, offered hot chocolate and cookies while they browsed for a coat that suited them. There were no forms to fill out, no proof of need required, just human beings helping other human beings prepare for the coming winter. A local reporter approached, asking Thomas how it felt to see the impact of his simple act of kindness 6 months earlier. He thought carefully before answering. "The truth is, I never expected anything to come from giving my coat away that night. It wasn't a grand gesture, just a human response to someone in need." He looked around at the bustling community center. "But I've learned that kindness can ripple outward in ways we never imagine. Sometimes the smallest actions have the greatest impact." Later that afternoon, as the event was winding down, Thomas noticed a young man helping his elderly father try on coats. The older man's hands shook with what looked like Parkinson's disease, making it difficult for him to manage the buttons. Without drawing attention to the struggle, the young man gently assisted maintaining his father's dignity throughout. Thomas approached them with a warm smile. "How are you folks doing? Finding everything okay?" The young man nodded. "This is amazing. Dad's coat gave out last winter, and with his medical bills." He trailed off, but the implication was clear. "I'm glad we could help," Thomas said simply. The older man looked up, his eyes bright with both intelligence and gratitude. The news said this was all because someone gave away their coat. That true? Thomas nodded, slightly uncomfortable with the focus on his act. Just trying to help someone who seemed to need it. The old man studied Thomas's face for a moment. You know, they say character is what you do when nobody's watching. Sounds like you passed that test. Later, as Thomas drove his daughters home, Lily asked from the back seat, Dad, do you think you'd still have given your coat to Dr. Fisher if you'd known who she really was? Thomas glanced in the rearview mirror at his daughter's thoughtful expression. That's an interesting question. What do you think? Lily considered it seriously. I think you would have, because you didn't give her your coat to get something back. You did it because she was cold and you weren't thinking about who she was at all. From beside her, Grace piped up. That's why you got the job, right? Because you were just being kind without wanting anything. Thomas smiled at his daughter's wisdom. I think you're both right. The funny thing is, if I had known who she was and given her my coat hoping to impress her, it probably wouldn't have worked at all. As they pulled into the driveway of their new home, a modest but comfortable house with a small backyard where the girls could play, Thomas felt a sense of contentment wash over him. The past 6 months had brought changes he never could have imagined. But through it all, he'd remained the same person, a father who loved his daughters, a caregiver who saw the humanity in everyone he met. That night, after the girls were in bed, Thomas stood in their backyard looking up at the stars. He thought about Anna and how proud she would be of their daughters, of the life he was building for them now. He thought about the thousands of patients whose care would improve because of the programs he was implementing. And he thought about a cold bus stop on a winter night, where a simple act of kindness had set in motion events that changed so many lives. In his pocket, his phone buzzed with a text message from Dr. Fisher. Check your email. Board approved full funding for the companion care program for isolated elderly patients. Your idea is going to change lives. Thomas smiled as he typed his reply. Thank you. Kindness returns. Looking back up at the stars, he whispered words he often found himself thinking these days. Sometimes the smallest choices lead us to the biggest changes. Then he turned and walked back into the house, closing the door on the night but opening it wide to all the possibilities that tomorrow would bring.